Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving into a topic that is absolutely crucial for your AQA psychology exam: brain plasticity and functional recovery. We're going to break down everything you need to know to not just answer the questions, but to really craft those top-tier responses. So, here's the plan. First, we'll nail down the key definitions. Then, we'll look at how the brain's abilities change throughout a person's life. After that, we'll get into the specifics of brain trauma and how the brain tries to heal itself. And finally, and this is the really important part, we'll focus on how you can apply all this knowledge to a real exam question. All right, let's start with the basics. We need to build a solid foundation. Getting these core definitions spot on is the first step to writing a great answer. These are the key words the examiners will be looking for, so let's get them down perfectly. Okay, so what is plasticity? Well, the most important thing to get is that the brain isn't this fixed, static organ. It's constantly changing, constantly remodeling itself. Every time you learn a new skill or memorize a fact, that's plasticity in action. Your brain is literally rewiring itself. But it's not just about learning. Plasticity is also the brain's fundamental tool for recovery after an injury. And that leads us right into functional recovery. This is basically plasticity's job after the brain gets hurt. It's the whole process of how the brain reorganizes itself to try and get back functions that were lost. It's a huge focus of neuroscience today and a key concept for your exam. Right, let's move on. A really good way to show deep understanding in an exam is to be able to compare and contrast. So here, we're going to look at the amazing plasticity of a developing brain and compare that to a mature adult brain. Just look at that number, 15,000. That's the number of connections each neuron has in a toddler's brain. It's staggering, right? It's basically a powerhouse of potential. What the brain does is create this massive surplus of connections. And then, through a process called synaptic pruning, it gets rid of the ones it doesn't use. Now, this isn't a bad thing. It actually makes the brain way more efficient as we get older. Now, here's a classic study you should absolutely have in your toolkit. Blakemore and Mitchell's work with kittens is such a powerful demonstration of plasticity. They raised kittens in these special enclosures with only vertical stripes. And what happened? Well, the kittens' brains physically adapted to that experience. The neurons in their visual cortex literally never learned to respond to horizontal lines. They weren't just ignoring them, their brains were physically incapable of seeing them. It's a perfect example of how experience shapes the brain. For a really powerful, almost mind-blowing example of functional recovery, especially in young brains, you just have to look at the hemispherectomy. This is a radical surgery where an entire half of the brain is removed, usually to treat extreme epilepsy. Now, in children, something incredible happens. The remaining hemisphere can adapt and take over many of the functions of the missing half, even complex things like language. It just shows the insane capacity of a young brain to reorganize itself. Okay, so let's put it all together here with a direct comparison. This is a fantastic point for evaluation in an essay. For a long time, people thought the brain just stopped changing around age 20. We now know that's completely wrong. Adult brains absolutely do change when we learn things. But, and this is the key point, the degree of plasticity is much more limited. Recovery from trauma is generally slower and often less complete than what we see in a child. All right, let's pivot now to the real core of this topic. What actually happens when the brain gets damaged, and what does it do to try and fix itself? Understanding these natural biological processes is absolutely essential. So, you need to know the main causes of brain trauma. Physical injuries are one, of course, but strokes are a huge one, and they come in two main types. You have cerebral hemorrhage, which is when a blood vessel bursts, causing a bleed on the brain. And then you have cerebral ischemia, which is when a vessel gets blocked. Both are really dangerous because they cut off the brain's blood supply. And the immediate result of that is devastating. When blood flow stops, brain cells are starved of oxygen and they start to die. This cell death can cause a massive range of problems, from issues with movement to memory loss, that's amnesia, or problems with language, which is called aphasia. The exact problem depends entirely on which part of the brain was damaged. But here's the amazing part. The brain fights back. It has this built-in recovery toolkit. In the first few days and weeks, some function comes back just because the initial swelling goes down. But then, more complex things start to happen. Axonal sprouting is a really key one. That's where healthy neurons grow new branches to try and form new connections and bypass the damaged areas. We also now know that in some parts of the brain, like the hippocampus, new neurons can actually be created, even in adults. So if the brain has these natural recovery methods, can you do anything to help it along? This section is so important. We'll look at some treatments, and then we're going to walk through exactly how to apply all of this to an exam-style question. This chart is a brilliant piece of evidence to use in your essays. It's from Tuber's study of soldiers who'd suffered brain damage. And look at the difference. 60% of the soldiers under 20 showed significant improvement. Compare that to only 20% of those over 26. This is strong evidence supporting the idea that our functional plasticity really does reduce as we get older. Modern science is looking at some really exciting ways to boost recovery. There's research into drugs that could encourage nerve growth. There's even the futuristic idea of using stem cells to replace damaged neurons. But one of the most effective methods we have right now is good old-fashioned rehabilitation, which basically forces the brain to reorganize itself. And constraint-induced therapy, or CIT, is a perfect example of this. Let's say a patient has had a stroke and can't use their left arm. With CIT, you'd restrain their working right arm. This forces them to try and use the affected left arm over and over again. This intensive practice encourages the brain to reorganize and find new ways to control that limb. It's a fantastic real-world example of using rehabilitation to harness plasticity. Okay, showtime. This is where we put it all together. Let's break down a typical exam question. First, read it really carefully. What are the clues? Alina has severe problem speaking, but no difficulty understanding. That is a classic set of symptoms. Now look at this hint. This is gold. The examiner is not just asking you to list facts about language areas in the brain. They want you to apply what you know specifically to Alina's situation. Making that direct link between the theory and the scenario, that's where the marks are won and lost. And here it is, the perfect structure for a 3-mark answer. It's so simple. Step 1, you identify the area. That's likely Broca's area. That's 1 mark. Step 2, you say what it does. It's responsible for speech production. That's your 2nd mark. And step 3, the crucial link. You explain that damage here causes expressive aphasia, which is exactly why Alina can understand speech but can't produce it fluently. Boom, full marks. Okay, let's do a quick fire roundup. These are the absolute key points you need to have locked in for your revision. The young brain is incredibly plastic. Adult brains still have plasticity, but it's more limited. Natural recovery happens through things like axonal sprouting. And really importantly, behavioral therapies like CIT can make a huge difference, with exciting future treatments like drugs and stem cells on the horizon. And finally, for those of you pushing for the very top grades, you have to think critically. And this right here is a goldmine for evaluation points. Think about the ethics of it all. If a patient has brain damage that affects their judgment, can they really give informed consent for a risky experimental surgery? Questioning the research and considering the wider implications, that's what shows a top-level understanding. So I'll leave you with this to think about. As we learn more and more about the brain's amazing ability to change, the biggest challenge might not be what's scientifically possible, but what is ethically right. Which of these paths do you think holds the most promise? It's a tricky question, and definitely one worth pondering. Thanks so much for joining me, and best of luck with your revision.